The intellect of the internet. Den was surfing the net when Luke suggested that they could have some fun via the internet. He said to the crowd that they could spam the internet with some spiritual propaganda and try to get the people of the world to unite not with violence, but with a force that was even greater and more effective. He said, "We could get the people of the world to stand together and have a global awakening, and get the world's controlling powers to rethink and revalue the way in which things are run." Everybody except one of them agreed, of which that was Charlie, who was sometimes known as Jeffrey, for he had a split personality, or so he said. A stepfather that was into Satan had brought him up, and Charlie, in an act of finding security or rebellion, had become a devout Jehovah's Witness. Charlie just sat and sulked, of which nobody paid any attention to, as the rest of the crowd composed a letter to the people to save the world from what looked like Armageddon. They decided to pretend to be higher beings, or entities that were projecting their message via some humans onto the internet, and it was headed Love Consciousness. They decided to call themselves TOM, which was an acronym for the oppressed minions. That night they put out their spiritual message into every echo that they could reach: business, philosophy, chat rooms, everything that they could reach throughout the entire globe via the internet. And when they were finished, they all traipsed home to get some rest. Love Consciousness. We come from the heart of all life. We have no name, for we live beyond concepts, but for your sake you can call us Tom. We are accessing a human computer. Of course we can go via satellite, but we do not want to be detected by your puppeteers. Please listen to this wisdom. Let us help you to evolve cosmically and spiritually. The puppeteers are destroying your planet. Help us build a resistance, so that we can liberate Earth from its turmoil and torment, and end the reign of the Sun Kings. There is a conscious energy that is thinking up all of reality, and it is working out what it wants to keep for heaven, and it is through our choices, actions, good ethics and wisdom that will help it to decide where we truly belong at the crossing. Together we must eradicate the darkness that is eating away at the planet before it is too late, and they cut off not only the life source of the planet, but also each and every person from reaching their full potential in life and in spiritual heaven. Heaven is to be found within an ever-loving, honest, open heart. So still your mind with meditation and contemplation. Listen to your inner thoughts, for they are the voice of justice and reason. Listen to your inner feelings and intuitions, for they give inspiration and ideas. Bring alive the wisdom of the philosopher and the innocence of the inquisitive child, end subjugation and injustice, and find global harmony on earth. Eternal Love, Tom. The Gathering Crowd. It was in the year of Aquarius, and there was an assembly of undergraduates and seekers of truth all grouped together in a large flat that had met each other through the local colleges, national universities, or inspired by Tom to come together to talk about the books that they had read, the views that they held and the dreams that they all shared. And although they all held slightly different opinions, they all felt that if they all got together that they could change the world for the better. A mixture of incense smoke filled the air, and the strobes, flashing lights, and alcohol made the setting. There was an industrial Gothic band that would only play if the audience inspired them with their intellectualism. The youths did their best to get them to play as they chatted on truth and the light. The partygoers were dressed in a mixture of hippie attires, and were sporting an array of various casual and hippie haircuts. The females had lightly applied makeup, and they all, both males and females, spoke with a southeastern English accents, and when they talked they took turns in an orderly fashion. Susan called out, "Does anyone want punch?" After the punch had been poured and passed out, everyone took their sitting positions, and then he introduced tonight's special guest, who was going to give a brief lecture at What is Reality from Metaphysics, and with that being said, he introduced Gerald. I believe and agree with the view that God, as we know it, cannot hold all the properties that we place onto him, so I guess we may call it spirit, or the powers that be. I believe in spirituality, and I think that there are many paths, and one of them can be from what one reads, as long as the wisdom is not clogged up with over-intellectualizing academic adjectives, and fancy over-elongated words when they explain it. He stopped to gather his thoughts and then he continued. When I choose a book, I read the back for the description and the view of the critics, and then I turn the book over and read the introduction, and finally I spontaneously flip through the pages and open it like when one cuts a pack of tarot cards, and then I read the chapter that it falls upon, and if it makes good sense and is written as it is spoken, I usually go on to purchase it. He suddenly looked contemplative, and then he said, I am presently reading Deepak Chopra, and my experiences and his teachings are of the same opinion. I have read his books, and although I found them very stimulating, because of his Vedic upbringing he was stuck when looking at it metaphysically with pantheism. I must say that his mind-body research and practices did bear results. Nevertheless, when he began to meld holism and quantum theory to explain his techniques and results, I do believe that he falls off of the rails somewhat. Do you not think? Then he said, I thought that I should perhaps elucidate the Hindu Vedas state, and Deepak quotes that we are like a solitary wave that lifts from the ocean going through a process of birth, youthfulness, adulthood, maturity, old age, and then plummets back into the ocean at physical death until one reaches Moksha or Nirvana and is then absorbed by Brahman. I must say that this, as I am sure you know, is a metaphor of our personal life's journey. Along with him saying that everything is God, it comes from God and returns to God, and if one merges his books and the teachings, one is supposed to awake to the fact that even the waves, that although appear separate from the ocean, are in fact God. He goes on to say that we must focus our awareness to a place that can be found in between our words and thoughts, and this is where and how we connect with Brahman, or God. Once one finds that place, one is interconnected to the whole universe, for one is enlightened. When in the gap, i.e., in between our words and thoughts, the healing processes can begin to function, and one can eventually get rid of cancer. Well, this, a few exercises, certain foods, medicines, herbs, and a change of one's environment is what Deepak and his mind-body healing process is all about. I am not saying that his theories or practices are no good, or they do not work, for I am sure that if he makes that one-on-one connection, that miracles can and do often happen, just like they do in other fields, such as psychology. I also value that if he believes in his work and he shows an authority with what he can do, that he can create faith in his patients, and we all know that faith alone can be a great healer, but what I do disagree with is his spiritual philosophy. He stopped and smiled and then said, the Hindus suggest that, just like when you have a bad toe and are aware of it, that it can be cut off from the rest of the body, or the whole, and that is why it will remain alone, unhealthy and in pain. But as soon as it gets better, it gets integrated back into the whole. So it is that all the while one is thinking that one exists as an individual. That one is cut off from God. However, as soon as one is, or can focus on the gap, one falls back into sync with Brahman. Then, like the toe and the body, everything in one's life is harmonious once more, and one's cancer can be pushed into remission. I am not going to slant the power of meditation too, for I know that this can be a powerful healing tool. However, when his buddy Wayne Dyer asked Deepak on one of their events that if you are enlightened and are one with everything, can you wiggle my toe? They in truth could only jest at the parody that had been created from Deepak's belief structure and Ryan's simple question. Deepak was blinded by his faith, and I quote from one of his books. He tells of his mother going into a notorious cave to meet Shiva, where it is said that Shiva presents itself as a cobra. He says that his mother sat there blissfully and had a tear in her eye as she came face to face with the snake. Then he says that Shiva broke the cobra stance and crawled off. I suppose so, as it can continue its cosmic dance. It is written that Shiva dances and the universe comes into being. If one looks at the statue of Shiva, one can see that in one hand there is a drum, meaning symbolically creation. In another a flame, meaning destruction. In the middle of the two is a third which holds out its palm, meaning peace, and then a fourth where the hand is pointing to its feet, or the ground as it dances, that states, break the spell of Maya, the illusion. So if Shiva doesn't dance, what becomes of creation? I should think that he must presume that Shiva is somehow able to bilocate, for if the dance was put aside, while it was the snake, surely according to their Vedic teachings the universe would lose momentum and everything would cease to exist. He took in a breath and then said, the Hindus are like the Buddhists, only that most of the Buddhists are atheists, except for the Tibetan strain, of course. Buddhists on the whole, not just Alan Watts, states that everything is an illusion, and that we as a species try to place order onto chaos, and in so doing we only end up with frustration, confusion and suffering. They say that if we awake to the fact that our sentences are only made up of a string of words, which in turn are only made up of a bunch of letters, that finally we would come to the understanding that our personalities are nothing but empirical data. They say if we do realize this, that we would have an ego death, and we would then reside in nirvana, or in a state of no wind. Now, as I said earlier, the Hindus say a similar thing, only with a pantheist slant, by adding that all the time that one thinks that one is a person, that that person will be out of sync with the rest of God, and everything will be disharmonious. However, when one awakes to the fact that everything is God, one will let go of the delusion, and let go of their personality, and reach a state of bliss, and at the same time release themselves from rebirth governed by the law of karma, and that is known as Moksha, and in so doing one will reunite with God and everything will become relative. Then when one is plugged in, one connects with their surroundings also, and then if one thinks of strawberry ice cream, before one knows it out of the blue a delivery boy will knock on your door with an icebox full of strawberry ice cream for your delight, which he claims to have personally witnessed, and will go on witnessing, for he is connected, and is at one with his God. This, I am sure one can plainly see, is a popular Americanization version of the Vedic teachings, and when it is put like that they seem like a megalomaniac, to say the least. I think that a connection can be had, and that we can, as he states, to some extent, seem to be the co-creators of our play. However, I personally feel intuitively that we are working with God and are not God. For I find it difficult to imagine that I make the sun shine and the orbits spin. Further, I am a strong believer in free will, and as Deepak and the Hindus suggest, when one finds that they are God, they are absorbed into Him like that of a tiny droplet of water when it drops into a mighty ocean. Basically, I fail to see the point of living many lives on a personal level, and when one reaches one's goal, one simply fades out of existence, as if one was never even in existence at all in the first place. Apart from in the memories of the people that are still living, that knew you of course, and or are placed in the log of the Akashic records for future people to tap into, if and when needed. He paused, gathered his thoughts, and then he continued. I would now like to turn to Western philosophy. Some areas of Western philosophy state that we look at something in motion, and if it repeats itself, say 3 times, that we see a pattern, and then it becomes part of our objectively ordered universe. This time we call it a scientific fact. They go on to say that just because it has repeated itself for 3 times, it does not mean that it is going to keep up that cycle. It could change course, or stop doing what it is doing altogether. They also state that we look at things and attach meaning to them. They call it a matter of fact. Like we hear someone speaking French, and we infer that they are French, and they turn out to be an English citizen speaking French. Or we find a watch on a deserted desert island, and we automatically think that it belongs to someone on the island. Therefore we are not alone, when it could have fallen out of the window of an airplane, or the basket of an air balloon that was passing over the island when it was dropped. They also say that we witness cause and effect, and we say that that does this, or that, and we create a record of it, and again it becomes an objective fact. We cannot say that this causes that. Or if you do something to this, that the same thing always happens. I mean, look at the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, when the scientists smash the atom with identical experimental equipment, plus they experiment in the same way, and the end result is always unpredictable and or always varies. He took a sip of wine, then he continued. I think that Descartes defines the Western philosophy when he says that we have a body, a mind and an a priori in his Cartesian dualism. He says that at death the body gets absorbed back into the soil. The mind, which is made from the 5 senses, scatters and fades into oblivion, and the a priori, which is God-given and gives us the ability to reason, giving us maths, geometry and deduction, and the wisdom, or recognition, that God exists, rationally gets put back on a shelf from whence it came. I can't see how he could come up with the cogito, and then reach that finally. I mean that 1 minute he writes that whether there is some demon, or himself, that plants these thoughts into his head. He is having the thoughts, therefore he must exist, and so he comes out with his famous statement, I think therefore I am, and then he gives us the aforementioned view on death, I mean, no soul and no afterlife, and he called himself a Christian. What was he thinking of, robbing everybody of their souls, an eternal resting place? He smiled and then he continued. Then you have Neoism, which again is Western spiritual philosophy, and it states that life is a kind of dream dreamt up by a creative energy. We all live in a spontaneous play, as we role-play the human aspects of our lives, seeking out the universal pleasures of the pleasure principle. We go through our lives setting targets and achieving our personal goals, and our main aim is to live our lives with an ever-loving, honest, open heart right up until our crossing, where we leave our physical bodies and world and are welcomed and integrated into the spiritual realms. The spirit world is an ocean of potential realities and practically a Googleplex of ideas. Or different lifestyles, basically. Just like when you were at school, you had a multitude of kids, teachers, goals and roles, but you only focused on your friends and your personal goals and targets. So it is the same for Neo's heaven. You live many lives of birth, generation, maturity and death on this side, and then you keep crossing over at death to the other side of the veil, only to return to the physical to begin again on your cyclic journey, until you perfect your spirit, and then you only reside in the light, where you go on perfecting until you reach unity and equality with God, where you become a creator, and go on to branch off and begin to create your own universe. Back to Hinduism, I fail to see the point of the progression, other than one reaches a state of bliss, and that one gets loads of nice things when one connects with God. However, to have no personal afterlife is a bit of a letdown and leaves one with a lot of unanswered questions. Do you not think? Well, as I see it, the universe is going to be there with or without your enlightenment, and so if this is the case, when one lets go of one's personality, nothing has actually been achieved, and there is no point to one's existence in the first place except that a bit of white noise came into being, found the light on its karmic path, became enlightened, got their just reward with bliss and loads of gifts and pleasures while they were living, and was then absorbed into the whole at their final physical death, leaving no trace of your existence whatsoever, apart from, as I keep saying in the Akasha records. What I cannot grasp, along with the fact that Deepak cannot wiggle Wayne's toe, is that what about ghosts, astral projectors, near-death experiences, reincarnation, and the knowledge and wisdom that is received from the other side of the veil with psychic mediums, modern technology and the like? I am sure that one can plainly see that these spirits have an identity, individuality, character, or personality, and that these traits do and can live on after physical death, and that they are not part of some kind of spiritual database that mediums tap into, creating the illusion of life after death like the skeptics and magicians dictate. I think that if one pieces it all together, that one can see a logical progression of the other self as it progresses or unfolds from here to eternity. He looked excited as he said, "There is definitely something there that we can feel intuitively, and with synchronicity and serendipity, we can see and experience the anomalies in the first person. The self is at the seat of our extrasensory perception, and it acts as an interface between one's spiritual information and one's everyday consciousness, and the self can be seen with the aid of electronic photography. With the photographs, one is able to see not only the differing shades and colors of the aura, but one can also see changes in the aura before they appear in its physical twin, the body. The changes usually show 2 days before the symptoms affect the physical body and are usually medical conditions or mood changes, and because one can see the illness in the ethereal doppelganger before it arrives in its physical double, one is able, with the aid of electronic photography, to predict the oncoming illnesses, which gives one more time to prepare for it. In some circles, I have heard the physical body being called the alpha, and its ethereal twin the beta body. However, I think that they should really be calling the spiritual body the alpha, and the physical body the beta, for as I have said, the evidence slants in that direction. I mean, when one takes a photo of a plant, one can also see the aura of the plant, and when one removes a leaf from the plant, the aura of the leaf is still visible where the leaf once was, even though the leaf is no longer there. Whereas when the aura is no longer with the leaf, or the leaf or plant withers and dies. So it is clear to see that the aura is not a derivative of the plant and physical body. It is the plant and the physical body, which is a derivative of the aura itself. The abstract feelings that attach themselves to our thoughts that we are inspired to talk and write about are brought on by our deeper, or other selves. The feelings are some kind of other self-awareness of that other world, or that there is more to our world than what we sense. Paganism is the tail of this force. Before it was transformed into God, and today it has been superseded by, for want of a better word and hypotheses, Spirit. We are spiritual entities that come from spirit to play out our days and roles as everyday humans, and we will be spiritual beings once more when our present incarnation comes to its end. We may never have an understanding of the true meaning to our nature and of all existence, however, that we know of its existence and can see the effects shows us its true spiritual purpose. We have not come down from spirit to forever gaze up and beyond the stars and get lost in the mystery of it all. As much as we have not come down to hypothesize an ideal lifestyle in order to be let through the gates of heaven at our peril. No, we have gone to all the trouble to create the illusion of life and forget about it so as we can become human beings dreaming of heaven. We should accept our roles and seek out our own personal myths and truths and be as nature intended, and that is, be human. Now, I do not mean throw in the towel and give up on spirit. What I do mean is, work together with each other and find a spiritual bond within your local and global communities. If we are spiritual beings pretending to be humans, let's get on with it and all make the world a better place. Do not let a tsunami be the global catalyst to help all those that have been lost and all those that have survived and suffered in one. Let your inner voice that promotes peace and harmony and speaks with and seeks out wisdom help all those people in the third world be the motivation, that empathy is there with or without the tragedy. All you have to do is wake up and muck in and help each other create a paradise here on earth. Paganism, theosophy and spirit are just products of intuition and inspiration taking shots in the dark, but peace, respect, common courtesy, kindness, and goodwill to all is at the core of all religious ethical thoughts and reasoning. Scientists that have studied the other self, which accompanies the physical body, tell us that the other self is independent and, as I have said, somehow creates the physical body. They also, when unifying their wisdom with superstring theorists and cosmologists, suggest that there are 11 dimensions, of which our own 4 dimensions, the ones of our senses, are the densest. They tell us that just as the physical body is a derivative of its ethereal twin, so it is most probable that the physical universe is a derivative of one or all of the other subtle 7. So this twin has been called by many names: Pan, God, Tao, Spirit, although they all have one universal nature and name in common, and can be united by all if they name it accordingly, as the Creator. Kevin. At that he handed over the focal point to Kevin, who wanted to share his wisdom on the origin of ethics. He said, "I've heard a tale where there were once 2 villages that had mighty armies to protect them from dawn until dusk each day. But one night the king of one of the villages felt vulnerable, because he realized that while his army slept in the dead of the night, that the neighboring village could decide to attack. The next morning the king wrote down what had been troubling him, and he called a meeting where he gathered his wisest men, and he presented them with the problem and asked them to read it, think it through and find a way to resolve it. The next day the king called a conference with the neighboring village's king, and they both got together, and they discussed the problem along with the wise men's resolution, which was to make a pact that neither of them would attack or sack their neighbors while they slept at night and were vulnerable, and this tale was the origins of ethics. And so it was in this way, not through God, that ethics derived, and that has totally left me to revalue a creator. I am not sure whether my soul came down from spirit and melded with my corporeal flesh, or if myself has been created from sensory input, reflexes, emotions, memories and habits, but what I do know is that I exist in both the physical and spiritual realms, the former when I am awake in my flesh, and the latter in my ethereal twin, when I am aware of being between sleep and wakefulness. I must stress that I, through my astral experiences, do believe in a soul, and if there is a soul, then there must be a God, a sole purpose, and an afterlife for us all to go to when our current physical lives, or our karmic incarnations, comes to an end. The astral planes, I think, are the shores of heaven, and when it is our time to cross, I am sure that we shall leave these shores behind with no regrets. Just peace, love, and spiritual freedom in our hearts and souls as we venture forth into the next stage of our lives, be it unification with that ultimate God consciousness, or with the attainment of our Godhead within eternal matter. The way I see it is that there are three states of awareness. You have the waking, sleeping, and the spiritual states, and as we oscillate between the three, we must awake, or become aware in all three of them, and carry over the wisdom from our adventures, so that we can refine, enhance, and also energize our souls. Essentially, life is about self-development. As we experience or observe relativity, diversity, and adversity while we are awake, enigmas, labyrinths, or fantasies built on our hopes and fears while we sleep, and ecstasy, growth and change to recharge the self in the spiritual states. Basically, in all of our states, it is in the giving and the receiving of unconditional love, peace, and wisdom that ticks all the boxes. Then and cut in, because science was her thing, and she wanted to share her wisdom with the insatiable crowd. I must cut in, said Anne, and add that atheist quantum physicists see reality from their own perspective, and this does not hold any truths when dealing with the existence and the nature of God. For example, to explain why the universe has come about and has developed in the way that it has and has created life, they say that there are an infinite amount of Big Bangs, creating an infinite amount of parallel universes, and that it is ours and ours only that has developed in the way in which it has, and that from our perspective it seems like we have been created, and that we can reflect upon the magic moments of our lives, and we wrongly hypothesize on a deity. They go on to say that there is both chaos and laws, but they do not postulate that these laws could have been laid down or set in motion from God. I know that God, for most people, is the Almighty Father in the sky, or the benevolent space cop watching over and subtly guiding us to do right and punishing us if we do wrong. But I tend to value that God is a force or intelligent energy that maybe has created more than one universe, as it's highly unlikely that ours is the only universe that has and can sustain life. Max then spoke. I love the creation-evolution argument, and it was great to hear their origins, but I would like to look to a few miracles that eventually led to life on Earth that for me proves that we have a creator. It is theorized that at the dawn of the solar system that Jupiter changed its orbit and moved closer to the Sun. And when it did, it plowed water from beyond the snow line, and eventually deposited it into what was to become the Earth, which solved the mystery of how the Earth got the majority of its water. And it also deposited the rest of the water onto the two neighboring planets Mars and Venus. As Saturn formed, Jupiter's and its joint gravities caused Jupiter to expand its orbit again, where it finally ended up in its current position, where it became the Earth's protector, as its size and gravity stops us from having catastrophic disasters from incoming asteroids as they enter our solar system. Next, 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth was finally formed and the lighter elements formed our crust, while the heavy elements sank to the bottom. And a molten nickel core was formed, and the energy reached out into space when the metals churned, creating the magnetic fields that, along with the atmosphere and the Earth's orbital position, protected us from the destructive solar winds that came from the Sun. However, Mars' water was blown away by the solar winds because it had no magnetic field to shield it, and Venus was vaporized by heat because it decreased its orbit and moved closer to the Sun. But Earth, water, and evolution gave us an abundance of a spectacular array of wonderful flourishing life. Then Shelley decided to add her knowledge on mediums into the mix, as she believed that authenticity of the hereafter would seal it for the creation-evolution argument forthwith, and she went on to say, There is a famous psychic medium, Sally Morgan, that works for the stars and the high and mighty, that proves in her extraordinary book that she is genuine, and that the skeptics are wrong in their assumption of body language or cold reading. I must say that when she authenticates herself, she is writing about her psychic abilities and not her mediumistic skills, but I am sure that in truth she means both, if she were asked. She says that a famous writer came to test her, and she told him things that only he could know. You can read his report online. Apparently he came along to her before testing her further with some anonymous test subjects. He writes for the Daily Mail. She told him about his holiday in Greece, a job his girlfriend had accepted, and even a dispute involving his parents, and it left him puzzled about what she was able to do. As she says, if she were cold reading and just generalizing, she would have suggested a holiday, whereas she told him not only of the holiday, but also the location too. She also writes that she does readings by phone, and they are also accurate, so how can it be body language? The other test subjects were also bedazzled by her authenticity and skill too. She told one woman that she was connected to a brutal murder, and the woman did not even know it at the time. She confirmed it at a later date. She told another that she had a recurring problem with her throat, and she confirmed that every year she loses her voice. As she writes, they were all equally impressed as they came out of her reading, thinking, how can she know that? Coming back to the mediums and leaving the psychic medium behind, they show their sitters that not only are their loved ones still alive and functioning in the ether, but that they are present in our lives if we call out to them. Although we are advised by both mediums and by those in spirit that they cannot come at our beck and call willy-nilly, for they have work to do and they need to progress on the other side spiritually. However, they will come when we are truly in need, or if they have skin to shed by helping us lift above our joint regrets and sorrow. For instance, they too can have problems that are holding back themselves and the sitter's spiritual progression. Say a suicide who has prematurely crossed over to the other side realizes that the problem was not resolved, and that taking his or her life and leaving all those that are left behind wrought with grief, regret, and guilt was not the responsible and the mature things to do. Basically, suicide is a truly self-serving, unthinking, and plain stupid immoral act. So communication with both parties via the medium is where a lot of light can be shed, and the horror, remorse, and unresolved issues can be dealt with, resolved, and let go. They tell the sitters spirit messages that are born of their observation and care. Yes, they tell the sitters what they were doing, say a few weeks or days prior to the sitting, when they were thinking of their lost loved ones, and the details and the responses are overwhelming even for myself, the reader, let alone the people in the books that are actually living these experiences. They even tell the sitters things that are out of the sitter's actual experiences, and even though the sitter says no, or I am not sure at the time of the sitting, they often get in touch with the mediums at a later date and shed light on the grey areas by telling the mediums that they're relatives that were sure confirmed what the spirit said, and this, as I am sure you know, rules out any form of telepathy or cold reading between the medium and the sitter. Plus, often the sitter can go into the sitting hoping to make that reunion with a specific post-death relative, but who they hoped would come through doesn't, as they make way for another spirit to communicate with the sitter, and the sitter leave feeling disappointed that they never made their spiritual connection. Further, in some literature, when this has happened, the sitters are totally blinded with disappointment, and the information suffers at the time of the sitting. Until, as I said, when they are able to connect either by their spouse, parent, or friends pointing out the indubitable facts that they had either heard in conversation after, or on a recording of the sitting. The highest wisdom to be gathered is that yes, life is eternal, but also that as we help each other we become one in our struggles and our self-developments, commitments and goals on either side of the veil, before, during and even after death. The connections are only 85% to 90% accurate even from the most reputable receiver and/or psychic medium. This is due to emotional, mental and psychic interference, accompanied by lack of knowledge and selective memory from all concerned in the dialogue, that being the sitter and medium, but not the spiritual entities themselves. The psychic mediums have their own references to certain impressed symbols from spirit, and at the same time the spirits impressing the symbols on the receiver's minds can also have their own personal or inter-family connection to the symbols that they are using. For example, a rose can mean one thing to the medium and another to the spirit and the sitter. One example is that I saw on television yesterday a medium, John Edward, who made reference to twins, and when he said that he was told something about twins, the sitters said that they had no recollection of twins to do with them or their family. The medium looked puzzled by this, and he said that he was seeing Gemini, the astrological symbol, and he went on to say that this usually means twins. The sitters then said that it was their father's birth sign, which it was in fact the deceased loved one that was coming through at that time. So Gemini was a proof to the sitters from the post-mortal relative via the medium that he, and not someone else, was coming through. I know that the skeptics and cynics give the mediums a hard time, and some mediums have a huge problem with this as they are always mentioning it. But they should remove those comments that burn deep inside and then just sit back and let the evidence do the talking, bearing in mind that it is the psychic medium, the discarnate entities and the sitters that are the cornerstone to the bridge between here and the hereafter, not the critics. When the mediums show that those in the spirit world can also see into Earth's future by dictating events that are to come, this also shows that they have abilities or a viewing system that is way beyond us, why we are in our physical world and shell. Although there is evidence that when one is in the theta state, that one has slow thoughts like that of the alpha mind state, and that we ourselves can communicate with spirit as we are able to steal a peek into the future and the light. Some suggest that it may not be that we are close to the meditative spiritual state, it is because our barriers are down. For the theta state is the mind state that one is in when one dreams and is on the verge of waking up from a good night's sleep. And it is in this non-judgmental state of disjointed events and circumstances that we hear the ethereal whispers that fill our hearts as it flows across the veil from our loved ones as they help us and themselves to let go. Others suggest that we are neither. It is that we are out and about in our astral selves, and that we are temporarily spirit people, and we make contact with all that we love on either side of the veil and on the astral planes. However, so we do not fall off the path of the original message. Let's let go of that thought and venture back into the original plot, and get back to the path that seeks out authenticity and spirit contact when dealing with mediums. Although, I must add before I totally let go of that thought that I think that it is a combination of all three states that I have just mentioned, and that as we make contact with the other side independently, we at the same time add authenticity to the work that is carried out at will by the psychic mediums. Synchronicities are the manifestations of spirit, as it shows us the signs that we are on form spiritually and in the right place. Or state of mind, and everything is going quite naturally as planned, and so if we live our lives with free will, goodwill and synchronicity, the afterlife will welcome us in with loving arms when each and every one of us finishes our days here on earth as we enter eternity. There is no God that has been written that compares to my God. My God had a pattern for the dinosaurs, the apes, and has a pattern for the perfect humans that are yet to come. In a nutshell, my God's perfections outweigh its imperfections, and has built a kingdom for us all to reside, where we will eternally play, rest and love all of its creation when our days are done. That's very interesting, and I think that it adds depth to what I am just about to propose when creating your own religion," said Andrew. I know what I am about to say that a few others picked up on it earlier, however. I need to plod through it to get to where I am going. So could you all please excuse me if I seem to regurgitate what others have said? In the old days in China they used to see the universe as opposites. You know, yin and yang, and this seemed to put everything into a true perspective. But if one smashes a sheet of glass, one can go further than opposites into diversity. Many shapes and sizes make up the fragments of that broken glass, and so it is with all the different forms and energies that make up our universe, which is now called the multiverse, because it is now stated in quantum physics that we have parallel universes in a sea of void or empty space. Hypothetically speaking, the multiverse is like a honeycomb of universes running parallel, but independently with our universe. In theory, they can all be accessed through consciousness or space or time portals. Some even suggest that one or more of these other dimensions probably house spiritual utopia, the place where we all ascend to in the afterlife, and the remaining dimensions could be parallel universes or alternate dimensions. Today's postmodern thinkers see the universe as some kind of mind created by a creator, although they can't actually say that, because they are scientists. So they say that the universe is somehow creating itself, instead of what they should be saying, which is that the universe is somehow thinking itself into creation. Basically, we are in the mind of God. We are in the mind of God, which brings me to an idea that Matty and I had the other day. Let's create our own religion. She was speaking rhetorically, and she did not wait for any replies. Like all those soul groups, who knows, perhaps it's our joint destinies. What do you think? Everyone thought it would be a fun adventure, and gave their affirmative. We could call it Neoism, Neo meaning new, in a nutshell a new religion. We could learn from all the other outdated religions of where they went wrong, and just take the best bits so as we can have a full positive effect with our new religion. Let us remove all the bad bits out of all the other religions. For example, let's get rid of the jealous God hypotheses, and say that we will not punish 4 generations of a person's life just because they wanted to follow another deity. It's up to them, and it's their loss if they choose another path to follow. Getting back on track, yes, as I say, I mean, why not take a little bit of good from all the religions before us? I mean, it is like sucking on lollipops. Why just enjoy one flavor when you can enjoy them all? Let's have a multi-flavored lollipop. That way we can have all the religions getting along in our new religion. You know, the fruit of the old and the seeds of the new. Everyone began to shift in their sitting positions with anticipation and excitement. She went on. The way I see it, we need a creator to make it real, and we need a creation myth that explains the origins of our creator, and why it decided to create creation in the first place. Our creator must dwell within eternity, so it does not have to have a creator itself. Just a purpose, and that purpose resides in us. Otherwise, we will get bogged down into the Father of the Father of the Father into infinity, so to speak, and our religion will run out of steam, become stupid, or just plain boring. Let us have this earth as the testing ground where our God can learn from its mistakes, thus eradicating the problem of evil. Let us say that our God is great, but not perfect, and sometimes it makes mistakes. But that does not mean that it is not good. It simply means that it is growing too like us. Yes, our God is not eternal and perfect. Our God is infinite and forever changing and growing. So, what if it messes up from time to time? That is why we are all here to learn and grow from our mistakes. As for ourselves, we make mistakes here on earth, and then look at our mistakes and us and learn from them in spirit in between lives, and then when we come back down we evolve and are closer toward perfection, and eventually we progress beyond the light toward our own divinity, where we become equal and one with our God. Let us say too that although the mistakes can have nasty consequences, that they can also bring fruitful rewards such as empathy, sympathy, compassion and support when dealing with the pain, tragedy, suffering, grief and the loss that comes with natural disasters, and get us to work closer and together with God when dealing with immoral acts that we have to come to terms with and rectify. In karmic circles, they say that when in spirit we choose to come down and die as victims in natural disasters, so as we can balance out our karma from previous lives. On the other hand, they say that when we choose to lose our relatives and friends in the disasters, we, the bereaved, come together and learn to deal with the negative circumstances and let go and move on from our pain and our loss. I must point out that we don't only learn from our mistakes, but we also learn from our accomplishments. Anyway, let us get back to our God's ethereal qualities. Let's not have a sex. Let us have our God as a spiritual energy or creative force, not as a male chauvinist pig, a fascist, or a close-minded homophobe. So as the feminists, different nationalities and the gays can join in too. I know that the Christians are now accepting gay people in their congregations, but that is only to bump up their crumbling and diminishing flock, not because they truly believe in gay pride, or their rights to be a gay Christian. We also need an ethical and corporeal dualism to connect our free will with our sole purpose, to give it a drive or ambition. We can initiate ourselves with a mystery where we have to find God's grace from the book. The book that our Creator has inspired our prophets to write, so as the world can recognize that it exists and that we are all on a spiritual and ethical journey, and the only path to follow is the path that is laden with unconditional love, tolerance, compassion, kindness and respect. We can write that we are all responsible for our own spiritual destinies, and that it is our duty to find our way home. Our deity is creating a spiritual utopia within eternity, and just like we create our world within the world, we are co-creators and subsequent residents in our future creation too. We get to our destination by knowing the wisdom of our God, along with being ethical, virtuous, and goodwill to one and all living things and beings on our planet. However, our God can be seen and felt, for just as all creatures great and small are judged by all for their actions, so it is then also for our God. The grace of our God is said to be found not only within its creation, but also in our love and freedom and all that is good and bad in everything that we do, and that is how we connect to our God, and at the same time help it to create, and for us to emulate God's precognition of our joint future spiritual utopia. Let us serve our God by finding out what it is that we are naturally good at, and then bring this out into our world as our service to God and humankind. For instance, if you are a painter, then paint, a carpenter, then do carpentry, a writer, then write, and such forth. We do not return to the source, for our God is the powerhouse from which everything has sprung, and to return to the source would be like the fat leaping back into the pan. Humankind is where the spirit breaks itself off from the whole and comes down into its humanity to find its own individuality. It's like a computer game in a space-time suit. It breaks itself off from the whole and lives its life in its body through the five senses in search of spiritual freedom and love. With all its fragility and vulnerability, it finds itself, and then upon it reaching its whole once more takes its place at the side of God within the heavens, where it becomes a God. God creates equals that can be like brothers and sisters. By spirits pretending to be humans, it takes many lives, but eventually they become equal to God and sit at its side in heaven. Heaven is where all the good and bad things are separated and then placed into their respective places, and that is where all the gods, both light and dark, will reside throughout all eternity. We not only cross over with our spirit's individuality intact, but we also take with us the fruits of our environments. Humanity gives us not only our spiritual freedom, but also it gives us the building blocks of heaven from our environment. We are creating heaven from our lives on earth, and we are crossing over with the fruits of our environments. This is how God procreates, so as it does not have to live its life on its own. We are all God's seeds finding ourselves and becoming whole on earth. All one has to do is to be good-willed and good-natured, and they will become as one with God. If we did not break off from the whole to find our individuality, we would be nothing other than mere puppets. Once we have found ourselves through our self-consciousness, or our humanity, nothing can take that away from us. We become spiritual humans living in eternal matter, as one with God. In a nutshell, we are all God, and when we discover that, we do not have to come down to earth again. We hop from life to life, gathering knowledge, love and wisdom. So it is then in full that we progress from this world, then in between lives and this world to and fro, then into the light, and then finally into the light beyond the light, where, as I said before, we meet our final resting place as we become co-creators together and as one with God, and that can give us our dualism that I said that we would require. We are humans, and we are also the seeds of God. Why should we be one apple tree in an open field when we can have an infinite orchard? So, it is then that God creates equals, so as it does not have to be alone. God is dreaming everything into creation, and we are all the fragments of that dream. Heaven, earth, the whole lot is nothing other than the imaginings of God. So do not think that God is dead, because we feel alone and abandoned, for our God is not dead. God is alive in our hearts and minds, and it is up to us where we take it. When we do it right, we dance in harmony with our God and then enter eternity. How can we know what lies beyond death? It will be said. In which we will reply, at first one must truly appreciate just how miraculous it is to be alive and in the grace of God, and when that is reached, let the healers, mediums and the psychics perform their services, and let their wisdom be scribed on our graves when it is writ. Do not weep for my soul, for I shall not fade. I will be there when you awake. I must add that all the other religions have distinguished and separated themselves from each other by stating that there is only one God, and their prophets prove that theirs are the only one, and in so doing they create conflict and at the same time cancel each other out, thus adding wood to the fire for the atheists, nihilists and the skeptics. What we need is to unite all gods by the unification of their prophets. Only then we will have peace, bliss and harmony throughout all the world's religions. Leslie Cartin. I have written a piece of writing that touches on the same subjects that you have mentioned, and it could be the catalyst for the change that you have just proposed, and I would love to share it with you. So would you mind if I read it aloud? Everyone present said that they would love to hear it, so she began to read aloud. At first there was God and all its angels, and all was at bliss and at peace in heaven. Then there was the creation of the physical domains, so as God could have children. The children were born of many different creatures, with humankind at the top of the chain. The humans were given the responsibility to look after the flora and the fauna, and in return the gardens would give them pride and a sense of purpose, and the animals would give them companionship and unconditional love. The humans were also given higher consciousness to go with their responsibility, so as they could connect with God's desires and grace. Also with their godlike attributes they could correlate with the angels who were there to guide, protect and comfort them, and with this union they were to create heaven on earth with civilization, culture and a healthy balance of nature. She stopped and took a breath, then she carried on with her literature. It is written that when we find peace and harmony on earth, that we will rule over its many kingdoms, and at death we will transcend to untold heights, where we will get to sit at God's side and be regarded as the holiest of holiest within heaven. She stopped again, took another breath, then reached her conclusion. On a personal level, all one has to do is to find their soul's purpose in life. Because we are all born with a gift and it is down to us to find it. So as we can be of service to God and humankind. So find and develop your gift and be of service, and then go forth and multiply and spread your love, peace and kindness on land, sea and the many kingdoms. She folded and placed the paper in her back pocket as she finished, and then everyone turned to Dina as she began to talk. Then Dina cut in. Coming back to Janet. I must say, Janet, that is an amazing idea. But can we say that if the universe is the mind of God, could not things pop into and out of its mind like it does with our minds? And if so, would this not lead to both chaos and order within its creation? Hence, natural disasters could be the byproduct of a natural and chaotic mind and not planned out in spirit, so we can have karma. I am not saying all natural disasters are brought about in this way. Because as we know, as the earth cools, so its plates move, and mountains and earthquakes and even volcanoes come into fruition. So some disasters could be predictable, and perhaps some spirits could choose to die in them. Or become a hero, or a saint as they rescue others that have been caught up in them, but not all of them. Further, could creation itself, the earth, life and conscious beings be the byproduct of a restless, chaotic and creative mind? I know that certain mystics claim to have complete control of their minds, and they say that they are still. But I think that is both unnatural and unrealistic. Because the mind naturally wanders. Our consciousness is like the reflection of the sun on a turbulent ocean. It seems to be in control of itself as it shimmers and coruscates upon the undulating waves and ocean, but then up comes an unexpected wave and voila. Chaos for a while until the ocean settles again. So perhaps not everything is written in spirit. Perhaps there is both chaos and order. And perhaps this will eradicate the problem of evil or God's mistakes with natural disasters. That's a great thought, Dina, said Janet. And a valid argument, and it could be more realistic than my testing ground theory. So I say, what the heck? Out with the old and in with the new. I know that it eradicates what I have just been saying about spirit and karma. But let's be progressive and not static like religions gone by. God's mind is, as Dina suggested, random, chaotic, creative and ordered, and this is why we think it's a testing ground, or why we have the existence of all the natural disasters, and even the Big Bang. Our planet, life, awareness and all consciousness is created with God's supernal, progressively imaginative and creative mind. So it is then that we come down and collect experiences, and through our karmic cyclic journey between the spirit and the flesh we weave our own unique design into the interface, or web, to carry it over with us, for we are the authors of and the interior designers of eternal matter that is manifested from our karma and the realization of God's precognitive dream.